You're listening to the Quint's podcast.
"28 years after the Babri Masjid was demolished, all 32 accused of plotting a conspiracy and incitement that led to the destruction of the 15th century mosque were acquitted for lack of evidence. This includes some big names from the BJP and the Sangh Parivar such as LK Advani, Murli Manohar Joshi, Kalyan, Singh and Bharti among others. Although the CBI Special Court examined as many as 351 prosecution witnesses, including journalists, locals and police and government officials, Special CBI Judge SK Yadav observed that there was no conclusive proof that the 1992 demolition was a pre-planned criminal conspiracy and held that it was just a quote-unquote spontaneous outpouring of emotions. In fact, he notes that some of the accused tried to stop the quote-unquote anti-social elements that were engaged in the destruction of the mosque. Welcoming the verdict, while Advani said that it's a vindication of his personal belief and the BJP's belief and their commitment towards the Ram Janmabhoomi movement, leaders of the opposition from the Congress, the AIMIM and the CPIM are all calling this a travesty of justice and asking who is it then that brought down the Babri Masjid? The judgment is a whopping 2,300 pages long, and although the finer details are yet to be reviewed fully, how should we be looking at the judgment? Did the fact that it's been going on for close to 3 decades affect the handling of the case? In this podcast, you'll hear from Vakasha Sachdev, legal editor of the Quint, Sanjay Hegde, senior advocate at the Supreme Court, Nilanjan Mukhopadhyay is senior journalist, and BJP politician Sudhanshu Mittal. You're tuned in to The Big Story, the podcast where we dissect the headline-making news for you. And I'm your host, Shorbri. So how did the charge of criminal conspiracy get included in the Babri Masjid case? Let's rewind a little. 2 main FIRs were filed on 6 December 1992, the day car sevaks demolished the Babri Masjid. One against unknown assailants who had climbed the dome and hammered away at it. The second one named 8 people: LK Advani, Murli Manohar Joshi, Bharti and Vinay Katyar of the BJP, and members of Vishwa Hindu Parishad such as Ashok Singhal, Giriraj Kishore, Vishnu Hari Dalmia and Sadhvi Ritambara. Other than these two, 47 more FIRs were filed based on complaints lodged by journalists as well. But anyway, initially the case against the car sevaks was handed to the CBI and the other one to the CID. However, a year later in 1993, the UP government handed both the cases over to the CBI. And that year, the CBI filed a charge sheet against 40 people, including the 8 BJP and VHP leaders. 3 years later, the CBI filed another supplementary charge sheet, which they claim began in 1990 when the first attempt to demolish the mosque was made. And the Quint's legal editor Vakasha Sachdev explains more on the procedural challenges that came up in the subsequent years that contributed to such a slow and tedious prosecution.
Now, initially, these FIRs were supposed to be done together. When the case was transferred to the CBI filed a charge sheet putting all of this stuff together and had said that there was a grand conspiracy behind all of this. When the initial Lucknow court had looked at the framing of charges again, they found that there was a clear case for conspiracy. Over the years, however, there were a lot of procedural challenges raised to the way all of this happened. LK Advani and the other people accused of conspiracy were able to show that the necessary permission from the High Court hadn't been taken when adding this charge, when clubbing the cases together. And this defect should have been pretty easy to actually fix, but the CBI didn't take action in time. The case eventually then ended up getting split into 2.
As you heard from Vakasha, this case followed anything but a straight line. After a lot of back and forth in 2003, the case involving Advani and the other leaders was separated from the main one in Lucknow and sent to Raebareli. Advani was in fact discharged by the Raebareli court in 2003, though the Allahabad High Court put him back on trial in 2005. However, even though it did this, it held that the conspiracy charges against him and the other leaders couldn't be tried. And all this back and forth went on until the Supreme Court stepped in 2017 and merged the 2 main cases, brought back the charge of criminal conspiracy, and also put a deadline on the trial at the CBI Special Court. But the fact that this case went on for 28 years only to end with an acquittal for the accused for lack of evidence, what does it say about the handling of the case? Senior advocate Sanjay Hegde offers his analysis.
Well, I don't think anybody wanted any convictions in the matter. The CBI had a very selective role to play. And this is an entire process. Two FIRs were filed. They were sought to be prosecuted in separate courts. There was a technical defect in as much as they hadn't taken the permission of the High Court. So therefore, when the matter went to the High Court first stayed the trial, then they thereafter struck down on one part of it. The CBI did not file an appeal. You see, a lot of all this happened during the NDA regime of Mr. Vajpayee. Thereafter, there was a change of regime, but still there was no seriousness in prosecuting it. The CBI never filed an appeal. And if you actually take the timeline, this case proceeded towards a conclusion only after the 2017 judgment of the Supreme Court, which combined both matters, said you take the evidence which has already been recorded, continue the case from there, and then deliver a verdict. What the Supreme Court has achieved by the 2017 verdict was to bring the matter to some conclusion. Whether that conclusion, whether the verdict at the end of the process satisfies anyone or not, that was not for the Supreme Court at that stage to do. But the entire period of 25 years, where there was all this pussyfooting, was obviously did not inure to the benefit of the prosecution. It inured to the benefit of the defense. Delay is a well-known defense tactic, and I don't think one should be particularly surprised at the final verdict which has come today.
Now, talking about the verdict, while on one hand the CBI judge said that the investigative agency has failed to prove a conspiracy by the accused and that it was a spontaneous act and not a pre-planned attack, on the other hand we also have material in the public domain, material that have been provided by a large number of journalists, some of whom were key witnesses in the case, which is at odds with what the court says. The Quint had also interviewed one of them, Praveen Jain, who's a key witness in the case. This was because the photojournalist had captured images of the rehearsal of the Babri demolition a day prior on 5th December 1992. And he said that he had to disguise himself as a member of the VHP to gain access to the grounds on which the practice was being held, and that his photographs certainly seemed to indicate that the demolition was pre-planned and not quote-unquote spontaneous. You can also check out the interview in the show notes of this episode. But considering all these facts, how do we view the judgment? We spoke to Nilanjan Mukhopadhyay, a senior journalist who had also reported extensively on the alleged conspiracy in the demolition, and he says that it's not just the evidence that counts, but the intention that matters.
You know, it is a very clever verdict going by only the criminal evidence or the forensic evidence, what we call. It does not take into account any of the other material evidence which was there of the demolition being planned, being the intention. Both are equally important. What you cite is not just Praveen, but a large number of journalists of that period, which includes me, had written reports extensively, either directly or quoting sources of how various plans were made and preparations were done, meetings were held on how the mosque is to be demolished. It has been documented. It is part of the Librhan Commission report also. These obviously have not been factored. Second most important thing which has not been factored is that in July 1989, when the Vishwa Hindu Parishad formally became a party in the civil suit by filing a petition moved by their vice president, Devki Nandan Agarwal, who was himself a former High Court judge. He filed this case on behalf of Ram Lala Virajman as the next best friend, which became the lead case in the entire title suit. which was disposed of by the Supreme Court in November 2019. Now, the petition which was filed by Agarwal in July 1989, it clearly sought an injunction against the plans to construct a temple after demolishing the existing structure. This is, I'm quoting verbatim from the Supreme Court judgment.
Right.
So in July 1989, the Vice President of the Vishwa Hindu Parishad becomes a party in the court case saying that it wants to construct a temple after demolishing the existing structure. So I think it settles it that the demolition was a intended, planned event. How to break it, what equipment to use is all a question of finer detail which were documented by the media. The CBI court has certainly not either taken these into account or has not been provided the details by the prosecution. Either of these possibilities shows that how the entire case was manipulated, and they generally decided to follow what the courts these days are increasingly believing to be the general societal sense of a majoritarian nature.
While there's a lot of ongoing speculation on whether the CBI will file an appeal, members of the BJP refute the conspiracy charges against the veteran leaders and argue that the case against their senior leaders was the real conspiracy. BJP member Sudhanshu Mittal, for instance, argues that Advani was himself dismayed by the incident.
The demolition of the Babri Mosque was not a planned event. In fact, if you recollect the reaction of Advani ji on the event, he was extremely dismayed and he says, my political movement has been now crushed. Because this was a symptom, this was a symbol of the kind of politics which was being practiced in India. The politics of appeasement, the politics of minority appeasement and pseudo-secularism. At times in life, events overtake people. This was not the first time a congregation had gathered at the Ayodhya mosque. But because of certain aggressive behavior of people who were trying to protect the mosque, it provoked a few sensibles, and they were the ones then who went on and did what happened. And then the overall gathering, which basically had desired this, they got an opportunity and they went ahead in demolition. But to term it as a pre-planned conspiracy was preposterous. This was done at the instance and at the, at the political messaging of the secular party, so-called secular party, to appease the hurt psyche of the Muslims. So there was no truth in the fact that there was a conspiracy which led to the demolition.
While Advani and Joshi have said that this verdict of the special court vindicates them, opposition leaders like Sitaram Yechuri and Randeep Surjewala have sought to suggest that it contradicts the Supreme Court's verdict from 9th November 2019 in the Ayodhya title dispute, in which the Constitution bench held that the demolition of the Babri Masjid was in quote-unquote clear illegality and egregious violation of the rule of law. It should be noted, of course, that the court was not looking at the evidence about the demolition and was instead dealing with a civil dispute over who should get to own the land. More details of the special court's judgment are likely to be out soon, but will there be an appeal? And will the CBI do better with such an appeal? That's something that remains to be seen. If you like listening to this episode, please subscribe to the Big Story playlist for episodic updates. We're live on Apple, Google Podcast, Spotify, JioSaavn, and most of the other popular podcast streaming platforms. For other podcasts, please log on to the Quint website and check out the podcast section. For any feedback, shoot an email to podcasts@thequint.com.
Thanks for listening. Log on to the Quint's website and check out our other podcasts.